blood victims.
If I may, as the minister who did that, we concluded that the day before the election was called. It's impossible.
Now, did the chairman of the OBR, Richard Hughes, really unveil the alarming truth behind the so-called £22 billion black hole? Well, in the Treasury Select Committee meeting on the 5th of November 2024, where our Tory MP, Glen, wanted to talk about the accusation of the £22 billion black hole on the 29th of July in Parliament, and he was hoping for the chairman of the OBR to say that it was total, utter bollocks.
So this assertion...
I would say to a limited extent. I mean, to some extent, I would say, but we'll come on to this.
I'm not trying to... I'm just trying to establish... Sure. I have a lot of respect for the dynamic between the Treasury and the OBR. What I'm trying to get at is how we've got into a situation where an assertion is made on the 29th of July about a black hole, which I would acknowledge is an ongoing tension that would crystallise at a fiscal event through the process that Mr. Joseph has just described. So I just want to determine what you think about that assertion when there was no OBR involvement prior to the fiscal event date budget being triggered.
We had built up a way of working with the Treasury, and we're going to get into the weeds, unfortunately, a bit on how forecasts are put together, but in particular on departmental expenditure limits, which is the 40% of public spending which is allocated out to departments, where which had worked well up until, I would say, this past year, where within periods covered by spending reviews, which DELs were set by departments, there was a system of expenditure control in place, which where we had a kind of high trust relationship with the Treasury that those things were being well managed and managed within the total. That system very clearly broke down, and when the information that came to light was presented to Parliament in July, we immediately wrote to the committee to say we were going to look into this because we were not aware of the pressures that had been highlighted. We did our own investigation overseen by our own non-executive directors and asked the Treasury the specific question, what were you aware about in terms of departmental pressures at the time we were putting together the March budget, which was earlier in time than the July statement, about spending about pressures on departmental spending. And the short answer was that there were about £9.5 billion worth of net pressure on departments' budgets, which they did not disclose to us as part of our usual budget preparation process around DEL. Which under the law and under the Act they should have done. We have written to the committee with the findings of that review, and we have also, together with the Treasury, I think put in place a better process, and one which I think gives us greater confidence, and I hope will give this committee greater confidence that in future that kind of failure will not happen again, and that the scrutiny of and it will involve greater scrutiny on our part of departmental expenditure limits and the preparation of departments' budgets to make sure that those kind of pressures do get disclosed to us, and if they are disclosed to us, we have a conversation about how they're going to be managed, how they're going to be offset, what does that mean for net overspending or underspending against departmental expenditure limits.
I mean, the point I'm making is that as a minister, one receives figures from the Treasury officials and is aware of those tensions. The interaction between you, your officials, and Treasury officials is out with the relationship between ministers. So this is essentially, as you've described, a dysfunction in the smoothness of the dynamic between the Treasury and the OBR. And what you're saying is that you think that will be fixed going forward.
So the focus of this review and the focus of its recommendations are about the institutional relationship between the OBR and the Treasury. What goes on inside the Treasury is you'll have the Treasury in front of you, so you can ask them.
Yes, we will.
What the recommendations that we make here are about the exchange of information between the OBR and the Treasury, and the way I would characterise it is that we are moving from a system of trust to a system of trust but verify, which is that they've got a set of budgets. But we want to know more about what the pressures on those budgets are. We want to know more about how much of the reserve has been committed at the start of a fiscal year, how much of it is left to deal with genuine contingencies. We want to know what decisions made about pay imply for pressures on departmental budgets and growth in those thereafter, to make sure that we're satisfied that what happened, the failure of oversight that very clearly happened back in March doesn't happen again.
Can I just ask you one other thing about the interaction with the Treasury. I recall in previous fiscal events there was an iterative process of discussion, for example, around the therapeutic effect, if you like, of the childcare policy. And during that conversation, the impact on jobs, etc., worked through. So, can you just describe how you are not? My assumption is that you're not sort of doing this in an ivory tower. That there is an iterative process, and the insistence of a politician and a democratically elected minister, if you like, to assert things does interact with your process. So, what I'm trying to get at is that I think you were unfairly vilified by previous chancellors and prime ministers of my party, and for that is highly regrettable in my personal view. But I think in order for you to have credibility going forward, it would be good to establish that you are subject to oversight and sort of input from politicians who can make assertions in policy, and you're not beyond challenge on that.
Of course. We come before this committee to answer to your oversight, and we have to reflect the cost of government policy as we understand it and as it is explained to us in our forecasts. But we rely on the Treasury to be forthcoming about their best estimates of the cost of government policies and the risks around those. And in this case, that does not appear to have happened.
But don't you think it's highly regrettable over the last few months that you've been sucked into this political debate about a black hole? And do you think that can be avoided in future?
I think what happened was regrettable because it meant that there was a serious overspend against our forecast. We've needed to make serious adjustments to that. Governments have had to make serious adjustments to policy. So I think the situation that happened was regrettable. We don't have the luxury of standing on the sidelines in these things. We have to do a forecast for departmental expenditure, and if there are errors and if there's undisclosed information, we have to correct for that, and we have to explain ourselves, which is why we did this review, which is why it was overseen by our non-executive directors, and which is why we submitted it to the committee as soon as it was done.
It's just that the problem we've got, and we're left with, and I'll finish on this question, is that the sort of assertion is made by the government that there was a sort of willful restriction on what was shared with you. And my impression working through, I think, 7 fiscal events was that there was a formal iterative process that Mr. Joseph described, where ministers relied on their officials to share whatever you requested. And therefore, I find it very hard to understand how that happened, given the integrity of Treasury officials.
We rely on the Treasury. That iterative discussion has to start on the basis of disclosure of information that the Treasury knows at the time about what's happening within departmental budgets and the pressures upon those budgets. That information was not shared with us at the time of the March budget, and it was information that was available to the Treasury at the time. Why that was the case?
How interesting, eh? Well, after our John Glen's face fell on the floor when he didn't like the replies he got and showed the party he represents for what it really is, a band of bandits, you could say. Great name for a rock band if you think about it. He was then followed by Labour MP Dame Siobhain McDonagh, and, well, she always has that uncanny knack of rubbing Tories up the right way, if you know what I mean, and boy, she didn't disappoint.
Yeah, just as a layperson's kind of questions on from John is, it just seems amazing to me that there can be something obvious like the compensation due to sub-postmasters or the compensation for people with the contaminated blood victims.
If I may, as the minister who did that, we concluded that the day before the election was called. It's impossible.
But how that could not be included. And the other thing that I find quite interesting, given our discussions with the former Chancellor about childcare, how can it be that the current government had to put in an extra £1.6 billion to meet the upcoming changes to the childcare policies brought in by the former government? Surely if you come up with a policy, you have to cost it and you have to put it...
Well, let's see if Ms Hughes can...
On the compensation schemes for infected blood and post office, They were highlighted in our report in March as risks to the forecast, but ones that we were not able to score at that point because the final details of the compensation schemes had not been announced. And in order to be able to put things into our forecast,
that
with
might have been
precision,
because they didn't want to put how much it was going to cost in.
Well, I think Mr. Joseph can't speculate on what have gone on inside the Treasury. Mr. Joseph.
I mean, essentially, in order for us to be able to put policies in our forecast, we have to be able to cost them with reasonable certainty, and there wasn't sufficient detail before the election, in March, I should say, to allow us to do that. We have now put the cost in the forecast because the final details of those schemes have now been announced. We were able to have discussions with the bodies that are running the schemes and agree on what a kind of central estimate of the costs will be. There's still quite a lot of uncertainty around that in terms of things like the degree to which there'll be take-up of the schemes and the average payments and the timescale over which the schemes will run, but we did feel that we had enough certainty to put numbers in the forecast.
That's the trouble with the Dame Siobhain McDonagh. Too much fence-sitting, you could say. She never says what she thinks, ever. But she does know how to ruffle Tory feathers, doesn't she? We know that from past videos. And shame waspy women didn't get a mention, though. But no wonder the Tories wanted the OBR findings banjaxed. They knew it would have revealed how much of a band of brigands they really are and always have been. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy everything House of Commons and Select Committee meetings, just give us a thumbs up and a like. And I shall just leave the video here and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.